Hi, my name is Ian, and this is my new player guide for 2.1. In this guide, I'm going to talk about why now is a great time to start, a little bit about team building, and some of the teams you can build with the characters that are actually coming out this patch and next patch. At the bottom of my screen, you can see the ID for my main account and the ID for my alt account that I started for this guide to sort of test that everything I think is possible actually is possible. So you may be asking yourself, why should I start now, right? Won't I be behind? And sure, you'll be behind, but it's a single player game. It doesn't really matter. You shouldn't be comparing yourself to others. In terms of why you should start now, right now is a great time because we're on first anniversary patch, and they're giving out a bunch of free stuff in celebration of the first anniversary of the game. The big thing, they're giving away 30 free pulls, and there are two 3x relic farms that'll be coming down this patch. Back in 1.5, they gave out a free doctor ratio. Maybe it was 1.6, I'm not sure. But free doctor ratio until the end of this patch. And doctor ratio is a great unit. He's currently the highest single target damage in the entire game. There's also a 4-star selector. You can pick between these 8 characters by doing the new event. And we also have some potentially meta-defining characters coming out in this patch. Quite frankly, they are insane from what I've seen so far. So I think the most important skill to learn as a new player coming into Honkai is how to team build, right? If you are late into the game and you have just terrible teams, you will not get through any of the content. But if you have a good team and they have well-built relics, you can just put it on auto and let the computer beat everything for you. Currently, there's two main shells for teams, right? There's Hypercarry, where you have your one DPS that theoretically could beat most enemies in the game by themselves. So you run them with 2 supports and the sustain just to try and not die. There's also dual DPS. Typically, when you run dual DPS, right, one of them is almost like a support for the other. So a good example is like Kafka Black Swan, right? Black Swan applies her special dot that does a ton of damage, and then Kafka can trigger the dot with her skill and her ult. So, right, sort of supporting her. And then we have the support slot and the sustain slot. I think an important piece of information to know is while there are like AoE harmony buffers, like Asta or Runmei that are very good, like especially Runmei with the Kafka Black Swan build, typically you want like a debuffer, because if you debuff a unit, the damage from both of your DPSs is buffed against that unit. Whereas if you have a harmony unit that buffs, right, one person or 2 people, they're buffing 1 or 2 people. So you're getting less value from the buff. So here are 2 example teams for each of the shells, right? Let's say you get Jingliu and you want to build Jingliu. First it's important to know what she does. She has this enhanced state where she does a ton more damage, gets a bunch of crit rate and attack percent. So you don't want to run harmony units that stack more attack percent, because you sort of get like diminishing returns over just getting crit damage or damage percent buffs instead. She also drains everyone while she's in her enhanced state, so you want to have like a pretty nice sustain that can keep everybody topped up, right? So they're not dying to random half-healthing attacks. So the first unit you want to put in is Bronya. Bronya's entire thing is that her skill pushes people forward. So if Jingliu is not in her enhanced state, she spends less of the turn cycle outside of it. And then on top of that, that push forward gives her the damage percent bonus, and her ult gives her crit damage. Right, another unit we're looking at is Tingyun. So Tingyun, her skill does give attack percent, which is not perfect for what you would want with Jingliu. It would be better if it gave crit damage or damage percent. However, her ult gives Jingliu ult charge, and Jingliu's ult lets her stay in her enhanced state for longer, right? And that's another reason why we're going to use Huahua in that team, right? Huahua's ult gives everybody on the team energy, so you're giving your Bronya energy to give your Jingliu more crit damage. You're giving your Tingyun energy to give your Jingliu more damage, and then you're giving your Jingliu more energy to stay in the enhanced state longer. And then on top of that, she's also a pretty solid solo sustain that sort of just incidentally heals everybody all the time. So let's take a look at like a dual DPS team comp. For this, I'm going to look at Dr. Ratio and Topaz. Well, so Dr. Ratio, his entire thing is that his skill has a percent chance to do a very high damage follow-up attack. The chance that it happens is dependent on how many debuffs are on the enemy, right? Well, Topaz is a unit that does a lot of follow-up attacks. So you're sort of like, if there's a support in the future that wants people to do follow-up attacks, you're double dipping on that. But she also has her own special debuff that she applies to a unit. And then when somebody follow-up attacks that unit, she advances her follow-up attack, so she gets to follow up on that unit. So the next thing we'd want to add, right, is like a debuffer, a mass debuffer support, like Pella. Pella ult, just blanket across the board, reduces defense on all the enemies, right? So that's another debuff for Ratio, and then that's a good support ability for your two DPSs, right? And then for sustain, we're going to go with Fushuan. I know Adventurine is coming out with this patch, and Adventurine would actually be better in this situation because his ult applies the debuff. He cares about follow-up attacks, and he does his own follow-up attacks. But for now, let's talk about Fushuan, right? Her entire thing is that she gives everybody damage mitigation. So these are all some very, especially Pella, some very squishy units. They die really easily, so that she can keep them alive. And then her skill also gives everybody crit rate. And follow-up characters typically are very interested in crit damage. They are typically crit builds that just, want more crit rate. Well, so I think the next important question to ask is like, what units can I get right now? In terms of standard banner units, right, we're looking at, I think the list is Bailu Japard, Yanqing, Bronya, Himiko, Welt, and then, who am I forgetting? Clara. I think the best three by far are Bronya, Himiko, and Welt. Bronya, just the best one out of the three, right? She is, since the beginning of the game, one of the best supports, even arguably better than like Runmei, right? In single target buffer scenarios, and in some situations, I believe she can be better than Sparkle, but do not quote me on that. Himiko is just a pretty solid follow-up attacking unit. She does a bunch of AoE damage. She's very good in the Pure Fiction game mode, the AoE game mode. And then Welt is also a pretty nice unit, especially if you plan on pulling for Acheron, who I'll talk about later. In terms of light cones, you're looking at Time Waits for No One. Just the best in-slot light cone for most of the 4-star abundance units, right? Lynx, Natasha, even this Bailu's best in slot. But the battle isn't over is Bronya's best light cone. It is just the one you want. And then Night on the Milky Way is a very good, versatile, like AoE damage dealer light cone for, again, Pure Fiction. In 2.1, right, we have Acheron, who is a sort of new kind of hypercarry unit, right? She doesn't care as much about harmony units as other hyper carries have in the past, right? A lot of them really want Branya, really want Ting Yun, really want Sparkle, and she kind of says, I don't care about those. She only wants Nihility. A lot of her damage is wrapped up in her ult, and you get ult charges by your teammates applying debuffs. So ideally, you would almost have 3 units that are all applying debuffs. Uh, you know, for if you ever plan on building other hyper carry team comps, right? You don't run into situations like they used to in the past, where I'm running Jingliu and Imbibitor Lune, and I want Ting Yun on both those teams. What do I do, right? Uh, Rerun in the first half is Locha. Locha is a very good healer, and he also provides the only form of AoE buff removal from enemies with his ult. Uh, he doesn't do a lot outside of just healing, but he's very comfortable healer. He does out of turn healing automatically, not like Natasha or Lynx where you have to use their ult and save their ult for that. He just does it and then it's on cooldown. So, all in all, he is a very good healer, but, maybe we'll lose some traction over time, assuming there isn't, like, more units like Jingliu or Blade who care about damaging themselves a bunch. Aventurine is coming out in the second half, and he is like I talked about before, the follow-up sustain unit, who is very aggressive. He does a lot of damage, and he applies like a shield to everyone just from. He's sort of like Lucha, but like more aggressive. Like he just automatically applies a shield whenever he does his follow-up attack. Uh, and then the rerun on the second half of 2.1 is Jingliu. Jingliu is historically, with Imbibitor Lune, the top 2 DPSs in the entire game. She has insane damage potential, and she's also really easy to build because, right, she gets a lot of crit rate and attack percent from her enhanced state. So you realistically, the only thing you really care about is crit damage and speed. You're only looking for 2 stats on your relics. In 2.2, the first half we're looking at is going to be Robin. There's no official information about either of these characters, so a lot of this is going to be like speculation. Robin is going to be a physical harmony unit. My guess, because Sparkle came out, in 2.0, she's probably not going to be a single target buffer. She's probably going to be buffing multiple 2 characters or your entire team. And my guess is that because, right, eventually they're leaning into follow-up attacks with some of these newer characters, she may care about follow-up attacks. On the second half, we're looking at Boot Hill, and Boot Hill is a physical hunt unit. Hunt units are typically single target, and the only guesses I have at what he could do is he's probably either going to lead into like break damage like Rune May, or he's going to be like very ult centric like Acheron, but be a hunt version of her. We don't know what the reruns are, but we can make some pretty good estimated guesses. Right, we could see Topaz. Topaz is the only character on 1.4 that hasn't gotten a rerun. We could see Fushuan. She's the oldest character to not have a rerun, Topaz being the second oldest. And then we could see the 1.5 units, Huahua and Argenti. There's a chance that they set the precedent for the time between second reruns. I believe Sela got hers on, I think it was 1.4, and Silverwolf got hers on 1.5. So we also could see one of those 2 characters, but we don't really know, and these are, I believe, more likely. I think the next question we should be asking ourselves is, who can we afford with the resources we get, right? Because it doesn't really matter who's coming out if you can only afford one or two of them, right? We don't need to be looking at all of them. We just need to know which one is the best for our account. I don't have the numbers on exactly how much Jade you get as a new account, but I do have the information for my alt account. In about 10 days of playing, I was able to do the Departure Warp, which is 50 pulls for 40, and you're guaranteed a 5-star. I got Bailu. I've done about 160 limited pulls. I think this number is out of date. I think it's a little higher. I failed 50-50, 30 pulls deep, got Welt, and then got Acheron. I think it was like 70 pulls deep, and then now I'm about 60 pulls deep on the Acheron Light Cone, and then standard pulls I've got about 75. So, who should we be pulling for? The way I see it, there's like 3 packages that can set you up with some very, very nice late game teams, right? We have the new hotness, Acheron. Acheron, again, like I said, a very debuff-centric solo sustain, solo DPS. Really cares about debuffs. I think for this, you would want to pull Acheron plus her Light Cone, because her Light Cone contributes a lot to her damage. It lets her get 2 of the 9 charges she needs on her turn. And then on her banner, you can get the 4 stars Pela, who, again, applies a debuff with her ult. And if you get her to E4, she can apply Ice Weakness with her skill, which is another debuff you can be applying. And you can get Gallagher, who is a sustain unit who applies debuffs. Another thing you care about, right? He applies one with his ult, and then he advances his next action. And then his next action is an enhanced basic that applies another debuff. If we see a Fushuan rerun, right, I would expect Fushuan to also be really good with her. You get the crit damage, and then you get to also run the Light Cone Futures Market. I can't remember what it's called, something like that. It's a Preservation Light Cone. When people hit you, you apply a burn to them, another debuff. And it's being applied on the enemy's turns, right? It doesn't work with Fushuan's damage redirection, right? They have to target her specifically. They can't target other people, and the damage gets redirected, and she applies the burn. But it's still pretty good. And we could also be seeing some 5-star support debuffers in the future. I would imagine they would do something like that, maybe 2.3, 2.4, 2.5. We'll have to see. The next package, we're looking at the Jingliu rerun. Right, the way I see it, you could go either the Hypercarry team comp that we talked about and hope for Huahua to come back, or you can do sort of this dual DPS where you're running Blade and they sort of synergize off of each other, because Blade cares about being hit, and Jingliu, for her attack percent bonus from her enhanced state, cares about allies having a lot of HP. She drains them and gets attack percent based on their HP. For now, I would say you want to pull for Jingliu and Lucha, and then if Huahua doesn't come, right, Lucha, Tingyun, Bronya, Jingliu is still a great team, right? You're not really losing that much. But if Huahua gets a rerun, then you can run your Hypercarry team comp, and you have 2 5-star sustains, assuming you pick this one. And then we have the follow-up package, right? This is sort of assuming that Robin is the follow-up support that I expect her to be, but you would pull for Aventurine and Robin, which would build the shell for any follow-up dual DPS comp, right? You get the Doctor Ratio for free. You could expect a Topaz in the future, and then that's your MOC team. You also get Herta E6 for free just by playing Simu, and you could get Himiko. If you do get both of them, that's another great dual DPS comp for Pure Fiction. And then we may be expecting, a certain character to come that was in the story. Realistically, I think you could pick one of these 2. If you pick Acheron and Jingliu, you may have to grind more. I think it is possible to get them both. But pulling for Acheron and her Light Cone and Locha all in 10 days is kind of rough. I think it would be a lot more comfortable to try and go for Jingliu and follow up, or Acheron and follow up. But both, any options you choose are going to be great. The Jingliu and the Acheron work well both in MOC and Pure Fiction. Right, they do a lot of AoE damage and just a lot of damage in general. So you may wonder, like, what about other team comps? What can I expect to build that isn't those three things? There's the dot comp that I talked about a little bit, and it's pretty unlikely. Right, there's no precedent been set for reruns yet, but even if there was, right, Kafka currently is behind Sela and Silverwolf, so I don't expect to see her anytime soon. And then Black Swan ran in 2.0, so you don't need Black Swan, right? You can run Sampo, you can run Gwenaifen, you could run Luca even, but you need the Kafka, and Kafka doesn't seem to be coming. Right? Monoquantum. The big piece you need for this is Silverwolf. Right? Silverwolf was the second character to get a rerun, so it's possible she could get a rerun in 2.3, 2.4, 2.5, whenever. And you could run her with QQ if Sela gets a rerun, which we could expect to happen before Silverwolf. You could run her as the DPS. And then Fushwan is also expecting to come back. So you'll have three of the pieces. The big thing we're missing for this is Sparkle, which, again, she came out in 2.0, so we can't really expect her to come back for quite a while. After that, if you're looking at other hyper carries like Sela, like Blade, like Imbibitor Lune, right, they all slot into either the Acheron team or the Jingliu team pretty easily. I think the hardest one to fit in is Imbibitor Lune, because he doesn't require but leans on Sparkle a lot to get the most out of his enhanced basics. But for any other character, right, you could just pick them up, and if you decide you don't like Acheron or Jingliu, just pull them out, put in the new one. Pretty plug and play with those teams. For future possible theoretical builds, the only thing I see is break comps. Right, Runmei is a AoE buffer that really leans into break, and we haven't seen a really good 5-star break DPS. Right, maybe that'll be Boot Hill. We just don't know. And if you wanted to build that sort of team, I wouldn't expect Runmei to get a rerun for another patch or two, at least 2.3, probably 2.4 or 2.5. Right, if you're thinking about building any of those teams, that's sort of the realistic chance at getting any of those. But that's it. Thanks for watching. This sort of stemmed from seeing those TikTok clips of people fighting Adventurine with terrible, terrible team comps. So I wanted to sort of make something to help those people out. If you are one of those people, or you know one of those people, I'd encourage you to send them my video. I'd really appreciate it. And again, thank you for watching.